I think, the mayor of Long Beach needs to be someone that you can pick up the phone and bring in to talk to about the issues you care about. And, I want you to keep this dialogue going. It's important. I think you're raising up issues that people truly care about. And it's okay to, get things wrong at times.
As of October 25th, only 5% of people in Long Beach have returned their ballots ahead of the November 8th election. If you are someone who is finding it difficult to sift through all that election information, don't worry, the Long Beach Post has you covered. We have several resources for you, all of which will be linked in the description. I do hope you consider this podcast a resource as well. It is difficult to summarize all the political policies of any candidate. However, I do hope these one-on-one interviews give you more information that you can make an informed decision as you cast your vote for mayor. Today, I'm interviewing my second mayoral candidate, and joining me now is mayoral candidate Rex Richardson on this episode of The Word.
Watch this.
You are now listening to The Word with Jackie Rae.
Welcome back to The Word. Once again, I am Jackie Rae. I'm very excited. This is one of the first people I interviewed when I came to Long Beach, so I feel like it's almost like a rebirth, if you will, because it's been over a year. So I'm excited to have Vice Mayor Rex Richardson with me today. And our first interview was via Zoom, so this is our first interview in person.
I remember that.
Thank you for being here in person. I definitely appreciate it. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for setting up this incredible forum. The studio looks great. You're right. It was Zoom. So that year I was doing a whole lot from my kitchen table, and I remember our conversations. But thanks for having me. I'm Rex. I've been vice mayor and a council member for 8 years. I got elected to the city council in 2014. I served 2 terms as vice mayor. I'm concluding my second term now. But I'm not originally from Long Beach. I was born on Scott Air Force Base in Belleville, Illinois. My father was in the Air Force. He was military police. And my mother was a welder at General Motors in Wentzville, Missouri. But her roots were really in the South. And when my mother and father divorced, and we moved around a lot. Like my sister was born in the Air Force Base. My brother was born in Missouri. I was born in Illinois. But when they divorced, we moved back down to the South. Speaking of family, I'm raising my family here in Long Beach. I met my wife when I was a student at Cal State Dominguez Hills. We were both in student government. I was student body president. She was the technology officer. She went on to do her master's doctorate at USC, and I started working for the city of Long Beach. Our 2 daughters were born at Long Beach Memorial Hospital. I bought my first home at 25 in North Long Beach right after the bubble burst. It was a tremendous opportunity for young people and young families to own homes. But those opportunities aren't there today for young people, right? So we're raising our daughters in North Long Beach. My wife works at USC, and I serve as vice mayor of the city of Long Beach, where I've been able to, work for the city since I was 26, spending every day making our city a better place.
Yeah, I mean, before we dive into, the nitty gritty, I do just want to, on a personal note, just very much say thank you for what you shared on the debate that the Long Beach Post held when you shared about your brother. One of the things that I hear a lot that's kind of a question that I've always wondered myself, but didn't necessarily have an answer to, was where is their family?
Right.
Why aren't their family here helping them? Mm-hmm. But then when you openly shared about your brother and you said, here I am, Rex Richardson, I have the means and I can't help. That really, I think people need to hear that kind of thing, but I was just hoping that maybe you could expound on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So we came to California when I was 11 years old. It was on a Greyhound bus. It was my mom, it was my sister, who's a year older than me, and my younger brother, who's 3.5 years younger than me. And when we got here, we struggled. We had a 2-bedroom apartment. My mom had 1 bedroom. My sister and brother shared a room, and I slept on the couch. And but we didn't know we were poor. We loved each other. Right. You don't know those things. I mean, we were on free and reduced lunch, and we ate the lunch. So, we didn't know we were poor. But we had those Southern values, work hard, get an education. Nobody can ever take it away from you. That's the type of thing that my mother instilled in us. So when I was 17, I got my college acceptance letter to go to Cal State Dominguez Hills as a part of EOP, right? Because I didn't get into Cal State Long Beach. It was impacted that year, right? And I had toured Cal State Long Beach and all of that, but I got into Cal State Dominguez Hills. Now, here's why I bring that up in connection to my brother. My experience at 17 was different than his experience at 17. When he was 17, he got into a fight and he got shot. He got shot in the back at a party. And he was airlifted to Long Beach Memorial Hospital. and that put him on a different trajectory in life. He's dealt with trauma. He's reacted in different ways. And unfortunately, he got involved in drugs. And it's difficult, right? Because you have a loved one that's out there in the streets. Now, over the past, decade or more, we've done our thing as a family. I mean, investing in resources, everything from mental health care and attorneys and all of those things. But the system is difficult to navigate. My brother, again, if it's difficult for me to navigate, I'm an elected official and a regional leader who's engaged in this work. My sister is a national leader on, education, things like that, and an elected official. And if we have a difficult time navigate this process, imagine if you're poor. Imagine if you have a language barrier and you have a brother or sister or aunt that's out there in the street. And so when I think about the mental health crisis and homelessness, I look at it from a personal standpoint of compassion, because if we can figure out how to make the process easier to navigate for people, and we don't give up on people, we can save people's lives. And so, on the campaign, I've talked about this a lot, that we have to build a more robust infrastructure to deal with substance use and mental health issues. Because that's, if you look at our homeless population, about 50% of the people on the streets is associated with something related to poverty.
Right.
Lack of housing, lack of a job. The majority of people in our city are living check to check. That's real. And we can help those people. But the other half, roughly half, are people who have dealt with substance use, mental health issues, or domestic abuse. And those may be more challenging, but we shouldn't lead with a more punitive approach first. We have to think about what capacity we can build to deal with it. About a year ago, I convened the hospitals in the city and some mental health service providers and Cal State Long Beach for a roundtable to ask the question, what aren't we doing? Where do we need to do more? And how can we build a more robust infrastructure? And a lot of good ideas came back. It's like, look, the county is doing a lot. The county funds a lot. What can we do to move some of that here locally? The hospital said, if somebody comes in and they're dealing with an issue, let's say they live in an encampment and they have a cut arm or a cut leg, we can patch them up on their arm. We can patch them up on their leg. But when we let them, after we've done that and they go back out, many times they come right back in the next 48 hours because we didn't patch them up here, and we didn't address what's going on here. So what they need is what's called recuperative care. The hospitals call it step-down facilities, where once you've gotten fixed up, you don't go into a hospital bed. You go to a place where you can rest, get back on your meds, sober up, and begin the process of accepting services. We don't have any recuperative care in Long Beach. One hospital mentioned they refer folks out to East LA. So when we talk about a more robust infrastructure to deal with it, we have to acknowledge that we are a big city. We're larger than St. Louis, larger than Miami. Sending folks to East LA is not the answer. So again, when it comes to mental health and homelessness and those issues, I look at it from a personal standpoint.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something you said. You see, I haven't even picked up my cards yet.
It's
We haven't
fine.
even gotten to the list
Well,
yet.
that's why I like podcasts, because they're really about conversations.
Right.
You can get to see the way people think about an issue.
Right. You said something that just kind of resonated a thought in
Sure.
me when you said, I think politicians are supposed to help people. And
I said government should
government
help
is
people.
supposed to help people.
Right.
I think a lot of us associate government and politics. But the reason why it resonated with me is because I was recently watching a debate between you and Susie Price. I believe it was in the Lakewood neighborhood.
Lakewood Village?
Yes.
That was a good one.
And she said something, and I asked her the same question, so I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
She said that she spent her entire life in
Right.
public service, and you've spent your entire life in politics. And for me, that was like, well, that's the same thing. So is there a difference?
Let's be real about this. So I was elected in 2014. So was Councilmember Price. We've been elected the exact same amount of time. Prior to that, I worked for the city of Long Beach for an elected official on the legislative floor as chief of staff. Councilwoman Price has also worked for an elected official for more than 20 years. So I worked for an elected official 20 years, and she's worked for an elected official for 4 years. I've worked for an elected official 4 years before city council, and she's worked 20. It's political silly season. People are going to try to mischaracterize what we do. The reality is, Councilwoman Price is a public servant, and so am I. And she ran for her reasons to do what she needed to do in her community, and I ran for the reasons that I wanted to do what I've done in my community. I would also say all work has dignity.
Right.
Even, my mother, when we landed out here, she worked at Arby's, right? I saw her working on the assembly line, with a union wage. We were proud. We would go put on the hard hats and the goggles and go visit the factory when she was building cars for General Motors. And then I saw my mother do what she needed to do, put food on the table with her 3 kids in California, on the fryers and on the grill at Arby's, right? And fun fact, it's the same Arby's Mayor Garcia worked at because we went to the same high school.
Oh, okay.
So right, and I worked at Jack in the Box because I needed to contribute. I paid the light bill. My sister paid the phone bill. My mom paid the rent. That's how we made ends meet. All work has dignity. You should never, particularly if you're running to be mayor of the city of Long Beach, where we have service workers and low-wage workers, as well as, aerospace and port employees. All work has dignity.
Now, you said it a couple of times, and I think it's an amazing feat that you bought your home at 25.
I did, yeah.
Aside from, being a trust fund kid, most of us are not going to be able to do that.
Which is why I talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I talk about that. Understand the circumstances. This was 2009.
Mm-hmm.
You had an economic catastrophe. We had foreclosures that impacted, all of us, right? Many, many cities, but particularly in North Central and West Long Beach is where you saw the highest concentration.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had an apartment in Bixby Knolls, a 1-bedroom apartment for $900. I was still a college student.
Bixby Knolls, $900.
$900
How
with
much
the
is,
garage.
How much is
with
rent
the
in
garage?
Man.
I checked on it. That unit goes for $2,300 now, and the garage is like an extra $100.
Oh, of course
or something,
it
right?
is.
Exactly. So I was still a student, and I had a lot of friends who actually lived on Banner Drive. There's a bunch of Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Dominguez Hills, and senior citizens that were living over there. But basically, President Obama came into office, and I was a big fan of Obama. I knocked on doors in New Hampshire, negative 30-degree weather. I was out there in the Texas Prima Caucus, facilitating the caucus. I was a delegate for Barack Obama. I was inspired, right? He did the economic stimulus plan. That included an $8,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers, right? To help get people to buy homes because we were in this situation. And I took advantage of that. And North Long Beach, I found some, people were saying, don't go north of Delamo, the history of crime and all that. I was like, this is great. I got a front yard and a backyard. We have neighbors. Like, I love it, right? And that set a foundation out. Here's why that's important. People today don't have those same opportunities.
Exactly.
Now, government has a role in changing that. And I was only able to do it because I got that down payment assistance from the federal government because I didn't have $10,000 or whatever I needed. That's why I was able to do it. Now, today, if that property is 3 times what it was back then, right? That means your down payment is going to be 3 times higher.
Exactly.
So here are things that we can do. Local government, City of Long Beach used to have down payment assistance. We don't have that anymore.
Right.
Redevelopment ended. So I proposed to bring down payment assistance back. So it was included in our recovery plan. We allocated $3 million to the effort, and we just brought on the contractor to manage it. So we're now doing down payment assistance because the data shows the most significant barrier to buying a home is the down payment. It's not the credit worthiness. There are non-bank lenders that can bring it down to 640, I think 630, 640 to get qualified. But the down payment is the challenge. And we're seeing people are buying homes in our communities, but they're not people who lived in our communities previously. So we're having a challenge with Long Beach renters converting into Long Beach homeowners by helping with down payment assistance. That's one thing that the city can do to help change that. Another thing we can do, we have a challenge with retention of employees right now. That's not just local government, that's corporate sector, all of that, right? What if we were to package down payment assistance for our city employees? Not only do you have someone who probably needs it, but now they live in our city. We help them buy their home in our city, and their employment in our city, I mean, they're gonna have not a lot of a commute. It's gonna help retain our employees, people who love the city, and give them an incentive to continue to work for our city.
There was a discussion during the city council about 5G tower, I
Yeah.
believe, and you had to recuse yourself because of your involvement
Right.
with
I work for Crown Castle. Right.
And with them, you're the manager of government affairs.
Right.
So what exactly does management of government affairs do?
So basically, so let's start with this. city council is a part-time job, right?
Of course, yeah.
So all of our council members are either retired or work full-time. I don't know that the public knows that, right?
I think so.
I don't think a lot of the public knows, right? And I think
okay.
it's, to be clear, we all work.
Yes, yes.
And we also are prohibited from doing work in the city or with the city, right? So we do a big firewall, right? So when I was chief of staff to Steve Neal, and then I got elected, I lost my job, right? So I went and got a job. So Crown Castle is a publicly traded Fortune 100 company. It's a major infrastructure company. When we talked about the digital divide and broadband, this is one of the leaders in that space, a $90 billion market cap. They own assets, everything from fiber, mostly fiber, legacy cell towers and small cell. That's what they do. Their customers are AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, those types of folks are their customers, right? The carriers. What I do is I help facilitate outside of I don't do any work in Long Beach,
right?
County of Los Angeles proper, or City of Los Angeles.
Okay.
But in other jurisdictions, I help facilitate basically like permitting and things like that. Now, I don't go to City Hall and submit permits, right? I don't do that, and I'm not a lobbyist, right? But I hire consultants. We've hired public affairs people, consultants, all of that to help make sure that when we own an asset, we have a healthy discussion, a relationship with the city. So, for example, we may own miles and miles of fiber in a city, right? Let's say somebody strikes a fiber line and there's a problem. They may call me, right, and say, "Hey, Rex, that falls under government affairs. Hey, a line of fiber has been struck. What do we do?" Then I will go internally to the team, engage public affairs, make sure that there's a plan to restore service and all of those things. So that's what I do, but that's not what a lobbyist does. So I'll tell you, every major company has government affairs, a vice president of government affairs. Now, they may hire lobbyists, and Crown Castle has a number of consultants across the country. It's a major company, right? But I'm not a lobbyist. That's not what I do. Now, in certain jurisdictions, they do require a corporate contact. Or, for example, like there's images of a registration that's out there in Carson. Yes, Carson is one of those jurisdictions where we own a lot of assets, but we have a registered lobbyist that we pay as a consultant if we need to engage with the city. But if the city has an issue, they can pick up the phone and call me, right? Or one of these jurisdictions can pick up the phone and call me, and I'll troubleshoot and figure it out. Now, the good news is the charter says the mayor can't work, right, outside. My only job is going to be mayor of the city of Long Beach, and I'm ready for it. Like I have a proven track record of figuring out how to make government work and overcome big challenges. I'm a collaborative leader, learn how to bring people together, and that's what Long Beach needs right now, is somebody who has to do that. So there's actually no conflict, right, with work. But I think because the mayor's only job is to be the mayor.
Right. So I tap into the Black community. So I did my due diligence and I reached out to, 50 or so people that I know, are invested in this city. And I asked them what they wanted to ask you. And it was one answer across the board. So everyone wanted to know, because that was the first question that I asked you the first time we interviewed, was about the Racial Equity and Reconciliation Initiative. And I really like that initiative because I think that the majority of people, when we see, not all, but the majority of us, when we see numbers you can't argue numbers. It's very difficult to argue numbers. And that initiative had, the initial one had some great numbers that said, 42, the initial report had 42.7 of those surveys wanted an increase in affordable housing, legal protections for Black people and people of color. 56.2, and this probably is my favorite one, wanted education reform, specifically in underserved communities, an increase in Black history, which I'm definitely a fan of that. Right. And then 52.9% were in favor of defunding the police, which that title has always been marketed wrong, the defunding of the police. And then on a June 7th webcast, I think you tried to brand it properly when you said...
I tried to explain it.
Right, when you said that, do I think that we should defund the police? Absolutely, but do I think we should get rid of police?
Actually, the quote was, do people ask, should we defund the police? Absolutely. People ask, right? Are we advocating to disband the police department fully?
Absolutely
Absolutely not.
Right. So you know, and when I first interviewed you, that was what I was excited
Right.
about. I thought Long Beach was going to be on the forefront of actually, because I think Black people, we get lost in terms like people of color.
Right.
And we have very specific needs that I
Right.
think when you say people of color, it's truly a disservice to Black people. And I was excited.
Yeah.
And then it kind of just went away. So everyone wants to know because it's no longer on your website.
It was never on my campaign website.
Exactly. So, okay, so it's not on your website. I haven't heard it mentioned since we had that first interview. So that is what the people that I've worked with want to know. What is going on with that, and why is that not at the forefront of you running for mayor?
So let's start with, for me, the equity work didn't start with the reconciliation initiative. Let's go back and get the story right. I got elected city council in 2014, and in that first year, I remember there was an incident. Within a week, there were 3 young men who were killed in my district, and you know, 2 were African American, 1 was Latino, and I remember thinking, and they were all between the age of like 19 and 22, separate incidences, unrelated. I think 1 was a stabbing and 2 were shootings, and I remember what stood out to me was it all happened around between 12 and 2 in the afternoon. This wasn't like late night. This was like 12
middle of the day.
Middle of the day. And I remember thinking, because at that time I was 30, 31. I wasn't that far in age from them. And I was like, where was I at? Where was I at 12 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday? When I was 19, when I was 20, I was on a college campus. And I began to think, well, what opportunities didn't these 3 young men have to where they weren't either on a college campus or making money at work or whatever, to where, and if we had gotten them opportunities, would they be alive today? And then President Obama announced, the My Brother's Keeper Community Challenge, and I jumped right in. So, got involved in talking about issues with respect to boys and young men of color and the unique challenges that they have. The data shows that when you intervene and provide resources at an early age to young people, it puts them on the right trajectory for their entire lives. That's where the beginning of the equity work started for me. That began to grow. I believe a year later, in 2016, we began discussions about establishing Office of Equity in the city. We had a community conversation called, Community Conversations, Unity, emphasize on unity, and it was governing for equity, something like that, right? And we brought in a council member from Oakland, Desley Brooks, who created the Oakland Office of Equity. We brought the San Diego Office of Civil Rights down, and we brought Alex Johnson, who was, I believe, is at the Wellness Foundation, and we had a roundtable. I believe it was at Keisha Young and Logan with community, or I don't remember where it was. And we began to talk about what do we need to do to have a better thought about better discussions about racial equity in the city, how we can change the way our government as an institution serves people. And we came up with the concept of let's create the first Office of Equity in Southern California right here in Long Beach. Our demographics show that it's needed. We anticipate that this is going to be an issue that like this 17-year difference life expectancy and generations of economic divide we can't continue on this way. So we began the Office of Equity, and we continue to build more work. We engaged in the national, the National League of Cities Race Equity and Leadership Initiative, which grabbed a cohort of cities and city managers to talk about racial equity and implicit bias. We began doing implicit bias trainings in the city. We got involved in Governing Alliance for Racial Equity. We just began that work. Then 2020 came, and we saw a number of things take place that really exposed deep inequities. So you saw, number one, a pandemic that exposed generations of health inequities in our community. When we saw that Black communities and brown communities had a more disproportionate impact based on the pandemic. We saw what happened with George Floyd in Minnesota. I mean, Minneapolis, not Minnesota. Minneapolis.
I knew what you meant, yeah.
Minneapolis is smarter than Long Beach. 4 years prior to that, 2016, I was at the White House. I was invited to the White House to talk about My Brother's Keeper and establishing the Office of Equity. On the panel next to me was the mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, who was also invited to talk about her work on boys and men of color and equity. Now, in 4 years, we saw basically Minneapolis go from someone that's being held up by the Obama administration as an example to all of us watching George Floyd be publicly executed. What that called on was for every city to like pull back the curtain, pop the hood. If it could happen in Minneapolis, it could happen anywhere. This deep inequity where it shook Minneapolis to its core. That city's gonna be traumatized for a long time. So that's why when that happened, we were ready in many ways for the conversation before other communities were ready. Mm-hmm. We already had built some capacity in our Office of Equity. It wasn't enough, clearly, right? We already had done work around economic inclusion in the city and had an everyone in plan. We already had, built an equity toolkit as a city. We already began to talk about inclusion, implicit bias. So we built on that and put forward a plan. That plan was to begin the conversation and turn the energy in the community and the complaints, put it down in writing. And that's what the racial equity, the framework for reconciliation was. We couldn't have meetings because of the pandemic, right? City Hall was closed while all this was happening, and everybody wanted to hear from their leaders, and they wanted to hear, what are you gonna do? So it was 4 steps. First, it was acknowledgement. We were a city that passed a resolution declaring institutional racism, public health crisis, and acknowledging that institutional racism exists, and you don't have 40 years of poverty in Long Beach and great economic divide without the city of Long Beach playing its part, from redlining to everything else. So that, I acknowledge it. Second was to listen. People had things to say, and some of them were not ready to talk yet. They weren't ready, and we acknowledge that. But for those who are ready, they spoke up. Right? We had virtual town halls, we had focus groups, and they were very well attended. And people put down that energy they were saying, they put it on the record. And then the third thing was convene, right? Once that happened, folks needed to take the data, match it up with what people were hearing, right? And convene and talk about strategies. And the 4th step was catalyze, put out a plan of action, short-term, medium-term, long-term. Right. So that was adopted by City Council. Mm-hmm. In that immediate budget, $2.5 million was allocated to begin the work. $1.5 million of it was structural, around that number. $1.5 million was structural. It was investments in things like reentry, which was called out. We have funded a reentry coordinator. It was organized in 4 categories, and that talked about everything from economic inclusion to public health to investments in police reform. Mm-hmm. And we just received our update on 1-year progress. Jurisdictions across the region are impressed with how far Long Beach has come. We have trained more than 1,000 city employees on implicit bias since that's begun. We moved the Office of Equity out of the health department into the city manager's office, established a deputy mayor that can help work on that, Teresa Chandler, that helps support the Office of Equity. They added additional staff. They moved resources into the Office of Equity. They're implementing many of those strategies. One strategy was to highlight health inequity and create a health equity center. Well, the first one is open now, the Ron Arias Health Equity Center in North Long Beach. That's where the My Brother's Keeper, My Sister's Keeper, the new Office of Youth Development, which is also called in the plan. The Office of Youth Development is located there. Sexual health clinics to align with the needs of the community. It's right next to Jordan High School. So guess what? We have a workforce program there, a youth workforce program that connects young people to jobs. So that's delivering results, right? We have to do a better job as a city at communication, clearly, right? And that's something that I've actually expressed, that we need to make sure that our city management and our Office of Equity has a robust public engagement apparatus to it, right? Because I think this is important. I think it's less about doing it to say it's done. It's more about creating a modern, more resilient city, because we don't want to become what Minneapolis became.
I think one of the overall consensus that I have heard is that I was talking to, this is several months ago, I did a podcast with, the name of the group is Black Lesbians of Long Beach. Okay. And they feel like, they don't live in the area where there's the rainbow flags and the rainbows on the street, and they feel like they're forgotten. And they openly said, we don't even know who to ask for these services that we need, because we're not over there. So why would we call, in that area? That's just been an overall consensus, no matter what race or demographic you are. Who do you call? Where do you go? In that consensus. So I definitely think that is the way to go.
In North Long Beach, there are 5 or 6 city halls closer to my house than my own city hall. So many of our residents have had those same challenges, and particularly with the LGBTQ community. When we were surprised when Prop 8 happened, like how many residents in North Long Beach voted against gay marriage, right? But then you have to understand our community. It's a community, like 92% people of color, folks are going to church and all of that. Now, so much has changed in recent years. Attitudes, people are more open and accepting, and it didn't happen by accident. Like, work has been done to make sure that people in the LGBTQ community feel safe in their neighborhoods and have access to more resources. I'll give you an example. We started Pride, North Long Beach Pride, right? And at Houghton Park and at some local restaurants to ensure that, like, North Long Beach also participated in Pride. The Ron Iris Health Equity Center is another example. Based on the data, we know that STIs, in recent years have been up. Particularly, like 2/3 of those cases are Black and brown men. And many of them live in the North Long Beach community. So the Ron Arias Health Equity Center was designed to meet those needs. That's why we invested in an actual sexual health clinic to provide services to youth and to adults there, right? Those are the types of things that we have to do to make sure that our city is being responsive to the needs of people, so that every part of town, no matter where you come from, no matter where you live, you know that the city has your back and we're providing your services, whether you are Black, whether you are LGBTQ, whether you are, white or Latino or API. That's what a modern government does.
Okay, so now I want to get to the most recent headlines. I'm sure you know we were going to get to this,
but good stuff. Some positive
we're
stuff.
going to end with all we've been talking about is good stuff.
Oh, I was just curious.
We're going to definitely end on some even more positive stuff. But we covered this story that happened in Los Angeles here in at the Long Beach Post, and we did that because Ron Herrera specifically, being the former president of the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, they do have ties to Long Beach. With those 300 unions, 2 of those are the Long Beach Firefighters and the Police Officers Association. So they do have ties to Long Beach. And the first time I even met Ron Herrera was at that primary dinner in June. That's the first time.
Election night.
The election night
right.
in June. That's the first time I've seen him. And I know that's in part because as president, he controls some of the money, and that the Fed, as they call it, donated over $500,000 to your.
Ron lives in Long Beach.
Either way, that's the first time I saw him. I didn't know who he was until he was there that night. That's the first time I had met him, and then of course, became aware of who he was. And I think, as a society, there is this need for people to immediately call out wrongdoing very succinctly and precisely. And my colleague here, Jason Ruiz, when all that happened, contacted you, and there was this whole Twitter thing that ended up happening where he said that you didn't immediately call for the resignation of Ron Herrera.
He reached out to me on Monday morning, right? And he actually saw me speaking at the 50-year time capsule opening.
Yep.
So he knew I wasn't answering my phone because I was the same place he was, right? And then I saw him. I said, "Hey, I'm going to call you back. When's your deadline?" He said 2:00. So I called him before 2:00 to answer any questions he had. I had a full statement posted on Twitter before I called him back.
I saw the statement.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't answer my question, because I think when you as a Black man specifically, and me as a Black woman, when I listened to that recording.
Yeah, so did I.
And it was infuriating. And to me, I'm trying to phrase this carefully. To me, it wasn't surprising. I think what's surprising to me and what would have really triggered me is if somebody that I was directly affiliated with was on that call and said nothing while these racist comments were not only being made, but also...
So let's play that out.
Hold on, let me finish. Let me finish my question. But also, while you're on that call, you're not saying anything. I think at the end, he said something to the effect of, "I got you," but you're listening to a conversation that effectively is trying to dismantle the Black vote. And we know that the Black vote is very much sought after, but unfortunately, it's not centralized enough to have enough power. And this conversation was trying to further that problem. To me, it would be... I would be remiss to not immediately call for his resignation, because you are somebody who was in that, and I am of the mind frame, and I think a lot of people are, that if you are not saying something, and then if your conversation later is something to the effect of
Right.
"I got you," you're complicit. So I would have immediately called for his resignation, because you don't belong in that leadership role
Right.
if you can't call out people while they're
Mhm.
in the midst of their racism. Calling them out afterwards is irrelevant at that point. But if you can't say it in the midst of that situation, you're complicit.
Right.
And you didn't do that. You said
That's not true, actually.
you did not. I have read
Yeah.
every statement you've made. You
Right.
did not call for his resignation.
I didn't call for any of their resignation.
After
So here's what
Mayor
I
Garcia
did.
tweet
I retweeted Mayor Garcia
about the
exactly
about the council members.
because I was echoing the leader of our city's tweet. That's what that was, a retweet.
I need
Am I mean, you asked the question. Let's get into it.
right.
So number one, the comments were hurtful, and I wasn't the first to like hear about it. I heard about it Sunday, and my first thought was, I was deeply disappointed.
Absolutely.
And I know conversations like that happen in a lot of different areas. You know, this wasn't the first time somebody, was caught on tape making racist statements about undermining Black people. A year ago, it happened in the OCDA's office. Dropped the N-word 3 times. And another one, it was dropped the N-word on recorded. Another one was talking about how to undermine Black defendants.
Right. Black men because
they date white women.
Right.
This is not new, Jackie.
Correct.
So it happened in Los Angeles a year ago. I didn't hear anybody being pushed to make a statement within 24 hours when my opponent works in that office and is a leader. I didn't see the Long Beach Post pushing that. But
I think there's a slight difference, though.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. You talking about my connection around is an endorsement, and which is why an endorsement that number one, me and Susie Price both interviewed for the endorsement of the LA County Federation of Labor. So it's not some unique endorsement. I was endorsed for my reelection. So was Susie for her reelection by the LA County Federation of Labor.
I think you're intentionally missing my point. I'm specifically saying, I'm specifically saying, you, Rex Richardson, because I can tell you right now, Thomas is, for those of y'all who are listening, he's standing in the room with us. He's our cameraman. My closest friend at the Long Beach Post. We take walks every day.
You know I love Thomas.
Everybody loves Thomas. It's impossible not to, right?
I get it.
As close as he and I are, if I am privy, well, obviously I wouldn't be in the room with that because I would call it out immediately. But if I found out secondhand that he had said something racist, specifically something that was detrimental,
what would you do immediately?
I would immediately call him out.
Would you break
directly.
to Twitter or would you go to him directly?
I would go to him directly. However, but when I am asked, if I am a public figure, which technically I am, if this had unfortunately gone public for Thomas, and I am asked publicly, what do you think should be done? I would say the Long Beach Post should terminate his position because we have no place for that in our journalism. We don't have any place for that.
And what I said, which was not included in the article, and I hope Jason recorded that conversation, because what I said time and time again is that those council members are accountable to the people of LA, and that the leader of the Secretary of Labor, the president of the Labor Federation, is accountable to its members. And now is a moment for deep accountability.
We hear these two terms all the time. People throw them around like they're popcorn: transparency and accountability.
Right.
They're catchphrases at this point because a lot of times that's not met with enough action. And what I'm saying is the reason why this whole thing was just viral on Twitter is because there's an expectation of condemnation right away. And you took kind of like, oh yeah, they should hold him accountable.
Maybe that's the problem with it. I think people rush to condemnation when sometimes, like, everybody acknowledges that what was said was wrong. And Ron stepped down like a day after the stuff came out. Like, I get that. But we should be making decisions. We should be thinking about what the process of healing looks like, how you can bring people together, how you can keep like that division outside of your communities, because it's very, very dangerous. And I do think that somebody like a mayor or an elected official, sure, you condemn when it's time to condemn. You also need to protect your community from those things coming into your community and being divisive. And I think our example in leaning in and responding with unity was the right example. that was the right response in Long Beach. Because again, this happened in Los Angeles. It did not happen in Long Beach, but we need to lean in. Like, number one, we have independent redistricting in Long Beach. LA does not, right? We've already taken certain steps. We have a National Day of Racial Healing. We lean into inclusion and unity and equity in our city. These are steps that we've taken. We were one of the first cities in the region to do so. And so if our response to a situation that happens in Orange County or in Los Angeles County looks different than them, that's okay. And it's okay to talk about healing. You know, I think there are a lot of folks who are hurt by the situation.
Yeah,
Personally,
I do.
It's a lot of people hurting.
I do. And
Right.
I think part of it
And
was
I took a day, and I'm okay with that.
I don't think
took a
anybody
day.
is upset that you took a day. I think you could have taken 2 days, you know, but I think at the end
No,
of the
that
day,
literally, I was jammed up on the phone, right? My statement really wasn't included in the article, but that's okay. Like, at the end of the day, this
you talking
situation
about
happened
the
in Los
one that
Angeles.
you did verbatim on Twitter?
Yeah.
The one that you said, it's been a tough day of processing the comments made by Los Angeles City Council member during a meeting that involved the LA Labor Fed Secretary Treasurer. I am deeply saddened by the anti-Black attitudes and rhetoric displayed. As elected officials, we should be held to a higher standard, and I expect the residents of the city of Los Angeles will hold their leaders accountable. In Long Beach, I am proud of the work we have done on racial equity, creating a city where everyone is welcome and respected. Believe it or not, Rex, I think that tweet is part of the problem, because I think that tweet literally diverts things back to Los Angeles. And I think, again,
And we should.
but
Okay.
hear
Go
me
ahead.
out though,
Yeah.
because again, Thomas, I'm gonna go back to my original example. He has no impact on my job. He has no impact on how I do our job, aside from the fact that he's a dope cameraman. But, you know, as far as my employment, zero impact he has on my job.
Yeah.
People know our affiliation though.
Yeah.
So if he does something wrong, why wouldn't I immediately call him out and say he should not probably hold this position because he feels this way about a community that is affected throughout these cities and these 300 unions. I don't, and I think that's where people's confusion is. They don't understand, and I think this is across the board. I don't think this is exclusively a Rex thing. I think our society has kind of developed this way to sugarcoat stuff instead of explicitly saying this person probably shouldn't hold this position if they feel this way about this community.
And I respect that, and I don't want to be dismissive of that. But what I will tell you is that was the first statement, and then 30 minutes later there was a second statement, and then as Ron resigned, there was a third statement. So what I'm saying to you is a lot of like we were reacting to what happened again in Los Angeles live, and frankly, a lot of things happen in Los Angeles and in Orange County that I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And as a leader, my priority is going to be focused on Long Beach. And in Long Beach, I think people needed to hear their leaders, number one, condemn what was going on and separate and make sure people know in Long Beach, which is what we did in that statement. In Long Beach, we are proud of our unity, the steps that we have taken to embrace inclusion in our city, because they are there and they are robust. And so that was my choice in that moment, was to protect our city from the drama in Los Angeles. And again, this is not unique to Los Angeles.
Oh no,
it's not unique.
everywhere.
We just Orange County's on one side of us, or LA County's on the other. OCDA's office has that stuff going on, you know, and you said the same stuff happened at LA City Hall.
Yeah.
We are Long Beach. And so I took a day. I took 24 hours as this thing was developing, and I even acknowledged that in my tweet. Like, it's been a hard day, right? It was hard. So I took a moment, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that part.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
not
it's
arguing
okay.
that part at all.
And frankly, I will say that we should acknowledge like the content of what it was. It was talking about diminishing Black representation,
right,
and the ability for Black people to be elected. And I just find it really interesting that I'm literally a Black elected official and candidate for office being held to a higher standard about something that was anti-Black. And
what do you
the
mean
reality
being
is,
held to a higher standard?
I didn't see this level of scrutiny or pressure from Long Beach Post calling on Susie Price to denounce the statements that her boss made.
Oh well,
when
you
that
should
happened.
listen to the podcast I did with her.
Oh,
You will hear what
mind you,
you're.
Jackie,
You will
mind you,
hear
Jackie,
what you're.
I haven't heard your podcast, but I didn't get a call from you.
Well, I would just let you know on a personal note. I am personally holding you to a higher standard, not in a bad way, but you know,
I'm okay with that.
We're 2022,
Right.
and if you win, you're going to be the first Black mayor this city has.
Absolutely.
It's important because, like it or not, the Black tax is real. We have to work twice as hard to get half the credit. That's why it takes so long for you to be a Black mayor in 2022.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's important for young
Mhm.
Black girls and young Black boys to be able to look up and
Right.
say, Rex not only held this position, he held it and he had integrity
Absolutely.
and a high standard, and he set the precedence for everybody who's coming after him, regardless of their color.
Absolutely.
So that's
And
just
thank
me
you.
as a personal
Absolutely.
note, just so you know that.
Right. Right. And I understand because you're coming from that position, but I will also acknowledge, like, there's a thing in America. There's a thing with deep history in America. It's called white supremacy. It exists, and without acknowledging that, we won't get to the root of why these things actually happen.
I agree.
So I think Long Beach is a good city. They're generally good people. I think we generally want to work together in our city. It's very different than those other jurisdictions. And because you raised this, I think, and thank you, Jackie, because a lot of people were out there jumping on Twitter, trying to score a political point based on this. And then you just came to me and asked about it. So I appreciate that. So here's what I'm going to say. So we're crystal and unequivocally clear. Those statements were wrong. They have no place in Los Angeles. They have no place in Long Beach. Leaders who think that way and operate that way should not be in public office, whether they should resign or not be elected to begin with. I think the labor movement is no exception. I was a labor organizer, right? I was a union rep, like Councilman Al Austin. I understand what it is and the responsibility you have for workers. It is not about you. It is about them. And Long Beach is filled with those workers. And so Ron Herrera should be held to the very same standard as the public officials. And I am glad that Ron resigned so that people can move on and that workers we can focus on the issues that matter, which is making sure that people can put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. That's been my values. And if my statement 24 hours after this scary emergency didn't strike the right chord with people, I'm sorry. But people should understand my heart and what I represent. And I've always, in this city, stood up for justice and for equality and making sure that people have a voice and feel safe in their community. That's my record. Yeah.
Have you thought about your political life beyond mayor, or is being a...
Yeah, I think about it a lot. And reality for me is I have a beautiful family. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. I have a dynamic wife who is, the associate director of the business analytics program at USC. And we are a young family. And going to Sacramento to spend 4 days a week in Sacramento, leaving my dynamic, beautiful family alone by themselves, is not something that I'm interested in. And there have been opportunities, certainly, to look at going to DC and going to Sacramento. That's not anything that I'm interested in while my kids are growing up, right? So while my kids are growing up and my wife is, pursuing her career and all of those things. So my focus has been and will be the city of Long Beach.
I do want to thank both council members, Susie Price and Rex Richardson, for stopping by and sharing more of themselves with the Word audience. And I do encourage you to vote early if possible, and make sure you are following us on Instagram and Twitter as we give you real-time updates on election night on November 8th. Once again, I'm Jackie Rae. Thank you so much for tuning into the Word podcast. And remember, if you have to speak a word, make it a good one.
Watch this.